They believed they had Karoline Leavitt cornered, trapped on live TV with no escape. But when the whole truth at last surfaced, the whole story turned around and hit them on the back of the head. The cameras were already in motion, recording every second. The studio lights shone a blinding spotlight on the panelists, lighting up the tension in the air. It was as if the unseen audience was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when it would all come apart. This was old ground for Karoline Leavitt. She had been through enough political sparring to understand how the game was played. A few fiery exchanges, some well-placed counterattacks, and by the end of it, both sides would emerge victorious. That was just the way the battlefield worked. She sat poised, confident, her hands folded demurely on the glass tabletop. A composed smile danced on her lips as the host opened the introductions. This was not her first rodeo. The configuration was the same. 2 conservatives, 2 liberals, and a moderator whose task was to keep the debate from getting out of hand. To her left sat Rebecca Vaughn, a veteran journalist with a reputation for verbal sparring and being able to strike with precision. Rebecca was not one to yell over people. She used her words as a scalpel, carving arguments into tiny pieces with slow, deliberate strength. She'd been working in the industry for more than 2 decades, where she had built a rep for never backing down from controversy. But Karoline was not deterred. She had argued more incendiary foes and emerged unharmed. For her, this was merely another evening, another debate, another opportunity to present her argument. And now, let's discuss tonight's subject, the moderator declared, facing the camera with a sense of expectation. An electric hush pervaded the room. We've witnessed a wave of stories about former President Donald Trump, his power, his continued legal struggles, and the persistent question of whether he still has the reins of conservative politics. Some think his hold is weakening, others that he's as powerful as ever. The moderator addressed Karoline. "Karoline, I'd like to begin with you. Where do you come down on this?" This was her moment, a moment made to order for her. Karoline straightened up in her seat, her voice firm and confident. "Let's be honest." And with that, she started. "There is no conservative movement without Trump," Karoline stated, her voice unshakable. "The media have spent years trying to kill him, but every so-called bombshell they drop falls flat and is a complete nothing burger. No, I don't think his influence is waning," she continued. "In fact, I think he's only just beginning." A ripple of approval came from the other conservative panelist, who nodded in agreement. But across the table, Rebecca Vaughn remained still, her hands loosely clasped together. Her eyes held a sharp, knowing glint, like a predator patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moderator sensed the tension and shifted his attention. "Rebecca, you've covered Trump extensively for years. What's your take on that?" Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. "It's easy to say Trump is still strong when you're looking at it from inside the bubble," she countered. "But step outside of that, and we're seeing a shift. One that many people aren't ready to admit. I've spoken to strategists, insiders, even former supporters, and they all say the same thing. His influence isn't what it used to be. And that's not opinion. It's numbers-backed. Take a look at the decline in endorsements. Take a look at the polling." Karoline laughed. "Polling? Oh, come on. Polls had Hillary Clinton winning by landslide, and we all know how that worked out." Rebecca didn't even blink. "It's not polling, Karoline. It's the lawsuits, the criminal inquiries, the widening list of folks turning their backs on him. At some point, you do have to ask, how much of this is fake news and how much of this is reality?" The tone became tense. The debate was heating up, but Karoline kept her cool. She had seen this before. "Every single time," she repeated, her voice heavy with experience. "You people say this is the end for Trump, and every single time he returns stronger. It's funny, almost, seeing the media scramble to put a new spin on things when the previous one fails to stick." Rebecca's lips smiled. but it wasn't a smile of amusement. Something was brewing, and the crowd knew they had to watch on to know what would be next. Rebecca's smile wasn't amused. It was something else, something deliberate. "Well, since we're discussing narratives," she replied slowly, consciously, "I do have something to say tonight that isn't spin, because as a journalist, I owed it to myself and to others to bring this up. Because if we're going to have the conversation about Trump's future, we need to have all of it, not just what his base wants to hear." She leaned in slightly, her eyes flashing towards the control room behind the cameras. Karoline felt it at once, a flutter of unease in her chest, a gut feeling. Something was on its way. The atmosphere in the studio thickened, heavy with an unspoken tension. But what Rebecca had to tell, Karoline hadn't been ready for this. For one quick moment, there was silence. Not the usual pause of talk, but something more, the kind of silence that precedes impact. Rebecca Vaughn's eyes remained fixed on Karoline as she made a discreet gesture to the control room. The large screen behind them flickered a moment later. Then, the image came into focus. The panelists shifted their heads slightly, the studio lights glinting off the glass table as the content of the screen became apparent. At first, it was just a paper, a scanned document of something official sounding, a court document, an affidavit. Karoline leaned in, attempting to read the tiny print. Even before she was able to read one word, Rebecca said, "This," she said, tracing a manicured finger along her notes, "is part of a sealed deposition from someone who worked closely with Trump's team, someone who was behind closed doors for conversations the public was never supposed to hear." The studio fell silent. Even the moderator, who had kept carefully neutral throughout, shifted in his seat. Karoline exhaled sharply, trying to laugh. "Let me guess. Another anonymous source? Another angry former employee seeking a book contract?" Rebecca didn't flinch. Not anonymous, not angry, just someone who realized they didn't want to be a part of the cover-up anymore. And with that, the terms of the debate changed. The question now wasn't so much what was in that document. It was whether Karoline could keep the story in hand before it ran out of control. And then, the screen shifted once more. This time, it wasn't a file. It was a recording, a grainy, black-and-white security camera snapshot suspended in time. The location, a private conference room, the type where backroom deals were struck. Karoline's chest began to tighten, but she pushed it away. Whatever this was, she would not give Rebecca the pleasure of a reaction. Rebecca was completely in command of the scene. She sounded calm, unflappable. "This tape," she went on, "was recorded lawfully through legal filings. It was filed with the court as evidence in an ongoing case, something the press has had no access to previously." She let that register for just a moment. But that was different this morning. The frozen image came to life. The video started playing. The sound was a little garbled, but the voices, indisputable. A slow, measured drawl spoke in staccato sentences. Trump. Karoline's jaw clenched. She willed herself to stay impassive, but the words sliced through the silence like a knife. "I don't care how we do it. Make it go away. Bury it. Do you hear me?" And then another voice. Less recognizable, but obviously someone receiving orders. "We'll take care of it, sir." No paper trail. The recording cut off in mid-sentence. The screen faded to black. For the first time during the debate, Karoline was speechless. The moderator cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Rebecca, what are we actually seeing here?" Rebecca shifted, not only to the panel but to the cameras, to the millions of viewers at home. "This," she said, her tone controlled, "is evidence from a current legal case. A case of secret payments, backroom deals, and the sort of discussions that were never intended to be heard." She allowed the impact of her words to sink in. "And the individual who filed this?" She hesitated, her eyes locking with Karoline. They were close to Trump. A slow flame ignited in Karoline's chest, but on the surface she was calm. For now, because the real fight, it was only just starting. "This is absurd," Karoline retorted, her tone infused with repressed anger. "You don't even have context for that clip. He could be discussing anything. It's a soundbite, and you know it." Rebecca leaned to one side of her head, examining Karoline with the intensity of a chess grandmaster, poised on the brink of checkmate. "If it's nothing," Rebecca said, sounding serene but icily sharp, "then why was it sealed?" Silence. Not from the panel, but from the whole studio. Even the men and women sitting behind the cameras appeared transfixed, holding their breath for whatever would come next. Karoline clenched the table edge, her knuckles whitening. "I'll tell you why," she said, her voice crisp, "because the media have been playing the same game for years, splicing audio, manipulating words, telling the public whatever they want to hear in order to fit their agenda." Rebecca's eyebrow went up. "You're saying it's not real?" Karoline took a slow breath. She couldn't say that. Not exactly. Because if she did, Rebecca would already possess the next card in her hand. A verification report, a legal seal, something undeniable that would establish the clip as authentic and unedited. Instead, Karoline leaned forward, her eyes locking with Rebecca's with unyielding intensity. "I'm saying you're playing a risky game," she said, her tone firm, "and you know precisely what you're doing." Rebecca didn't blink. "I do," she said. "I'm telling the truth." Karoline faced the moderator, her annoyance breaking through. "And are we just going to stand idly by and let this pass? A self-proclaimed journalist spewing half-baked facts on live TV without letting anyone even try to verify them." Rebecca sat back in her chair, utterly unflappable. "By all means, verify it." Karoline gritted her teeth. This was a setup. Rebecca had prepared for this. Every scenario addressed, every potential pushback anticipated, and Karoline knew exactly what was going on. This was no longer a debate. This was a takedown. But if Rebecca believed Karoline was going down without a fight, she was mistaken. The air in the studio had thickened into something oppressive. The familiar cadence of debate, point, counterpoint, interruption, was lost. Now, it was a fight for survival, and the next step could alter everything. Now it was something different, something personal. Karoline felt the cameras weighing down on her, the millions of eyes upon her. She could already envision the viral videos playing out in the imaginations of producers and social media editors. This was no longer a debate. It was a moment. And Rebecca Vaughn, she was too serene, too motionless, like a predator observing its prey walk right into place. Karoline breathed slowly in through her nose, calming herself. She wasn't going to give them what they wanted. She wasn't going to respond. "You know what's interesting?" she said at last, her tone deliberate, measured. "For years, the media has accused Trump and his supporters of peddling conspiracy theories, but now, here you are, spouting some shadowy recording with no context, hoping people will just believe you." She addressed the moderator. "Tell me, is this journalism these days? Drop a cutout clip on live television and label it breaking news." Rebecca didn't flinch. "The clip isn't edited," she replied matter-of-factly. Karoline gave a sarcastic snort. "Oh, naturally not. It's just conveniently omitted everything leading up to and after. How handy for you, Rebecca." Rebecca cocked her head to one side. "Would you like me to play more? A challenge. A straight one." For a split second, Karoline lingered. She didn't know what was to come, and that made her feel queasy. The moderator flicked between them, catching the change. "Rebecca, do you have the complete—" Rebecca held up her hand, forestalling him. "Actually, let's backtrack," she replied suavely. Then to Karoline she said, "Let's pretend, for argument's sake, that there's more to this clip." And, like that, she cinched the trap, because the next question wasn't so much about the recording, it was about how Karoline would get out of it. Rebecca's tone was even, measured. "What precisely do you believe Trump meant when he said, 'Make it disappear'?" Karoline didn't blink. She met Rebecca's eye, not looking away. "I think he was talking about something else," she said, speaking evenly, "and if you had any sense of journalistic ethics, you'd acknowledge that. Rather than spurring controversy to get clicks." Rebecca's mouth curled up into a slight, knowing smile, the type that made Karoline's skin prickle with annoyance. "You don't really want the whole situation," Rebecca told her, lying smoothly. "You just want an exit out of this one." The transition was so subtle, but Karoline sensed it. Rebecca had just turned things around, and now Karoline could already see how this scene would be manipulated. Karoline Leavitt avoids questions on live television. Leavitt won't answer straight questions. Conservative commentator melts down over Trump surprise. The headlines were literally writing themselves. Karoline's nails dug into the glass table. "You're unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "You sit here acting like some fearless truth-teller, but you're just another media hack playing gotcha games." She gestured toward the screen. If this so-called evidence was so explosive, why is it being revealed on a panel show instead of in a court of law? Rebecca didn't blink. Her expression remained unreadable. Who says it won't be? A direct hit, and this one landed. Because that was the genuine threat. If this clip, if this case, if this thing actually went somewhere, then Trump's legal issues weren't noise. They weren't spin. They were actual problems. Karoline pushed the words down her throat before they would appear on her face. Otherwise, she inclined forward, and the tone in her voice crisp. "You're making it like you just left behind a smoking gun," she reminded him, talking slowly. "But let's get real." She put her eyes in Rebecca's line of sight. "You're just tossing breadcrumbs and hoping people are too stupid to see the pieces that are missing." Karoline looked into the camera, her stare intense, her tone biting. "Now, this is what the media does. They manipulate. They push agendas. They want you angry. They want you afraid. And above all, they want you to believe that they know everything." Across the table, Rebecca watched, completely unshaken, almost like she had expected this. "That's an interesting deflection," Rebecca said smoothly. "But let me ask you something, Karoline. If this clip really is nothing," she tilted her head slightly, "why are you so rattled?" Silence. And that right there was the moment that would go viral. Karoline could sense it. The pressure mounting behind her ribs, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She knew what was occurring. She knew how this game was played, and yet she couldn't let it affect her. Not now. The moderator cleared his throat, sensing the razor's edge this debate was on. "All right, let's—" But Karoline wasn't finished. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I just going to sit here and nod politely while Rebecca does her breaking news trick?" She spun hard around to Rebecca, her tone a knife. "You don't want the truth. You want your moment." She nodded toward the cameras. "Congratulations. You got it. But you know what? People are smarter than you give them credit for. They see through this." Rebecca didn't respond. She simply picked up her pen, tapping it lightly against the table. A single, calculated tap. "We'll see," she said. Karoline knew what that meant. The damage had already been done. The clip was out there. The headlines were probably being written as they spoke, but she wasn't going down like this. And she wasn't done fighting. The second the segment ended, the tension didn't break. It only thickened. Karoline hardly waited for the cameras to switch before yanking off her mic. The tiny device released a loud pop as it broke away from her blouse. Karoline sprang up from her seat, anger seething in her chest. "You arranged that," she growled, swiveling around to Rebecca. Rebecca, still sitting, scarcely batted an eyelid. She just arched an eyebrow, cool as ice. "I did my job." Karoline issued a cold, mirthless laugh. "Oh, come on. That wasn't journalism. That was a hit piece." She glared at the moderator, hoping for support. Nothing. He looked away, rummaging through his papers as if he hadn't just stood by and watched her get attacked on national TV. "And you let it happen," she said icily. Still nothing. Of course not. That was how these things went. The media professed to be impartial, but when things like this occurred, when conservatives were caught off guard, cornered, ambushed, their voices suddenly fell silent. A producer strolled over, headset still in place, tone husky. "I need to clear the set, Karoline." She did not pay attention to him. Her heart wasn't racing with nervousness. It was with raw frustration. She had argued with Rebecca Vaughn so many times that she knew precisely how she worked. She wasn't some innocent journalist who had tripped over a scoop. She was calculating each word, each hesitation, each deliberately placed moment of quiet. It was all planned, and Karoline had marched right into it. She faced Rebecca, her tone tight. "You're acting like you're some brave truth-sayer," she spat, her words dripping with held anger. "But you're just another vulture. You didn't write anything tonight. You teased a crowd. You tossed just enough crumbs to give the impression of a scandal." At last, Rebecca stood up. She withdrew her mic slowly, with intent, and then, just as she was leaving, she glared at Karoline and said almost carelessly, "If it's nothing, then why are you so angry?" The words sting like a needle in the skin, small but piercing. Karoline gritted her teeth because she knew why, and so did Rebecca. They distort the truth and get away with it. Rebecca said nothing. She didn't need to. In her head, the conversation was already finished. Producers were closing in now, escorting them to the door as the studio lights faded. The argument was over, but Karoline knew the battle was only just starting. She could already envision it. The Twitter clips being shared, the headlines distorting her words, the constant deluge of hate messages flooding her inbox. By the time she picked up her phone, the media storm would already be raging full bore. But as she stormed out of the studio, she also knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And Rebecca Vaughn had no idea what was waiting in store. By the time Karoline made it to her car, her phone was blowing up. Calls, texts, notifications piling on top of each other. She didn't check them. Not yet. Instead, she clenched the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe. Rebecca Vaughn had pulled off her ambush flawlessly, a perfectly timed media hit piece, already getting out of hand. Karoline didn't even need to glance at her phone to know how it was being spun. Karoline Leavitt loses it after reporter uncovers Trump scandal live on TV. Conservative commentator shaken by leaked Trump tape. Watch. Karoline Leavitt struggled to defend the indefensible. She could already imagine the smug news anchors picking apart her every response, pausing on every shot, breaking down every flicker of emotion, searching for weakness. She let out a sharp breath and unlocked her phone. It was worse than she had hoped. Clips from the debate had already gone viral. Her name was trending. Conservative fans were rallying to her side. But the other side? She looked scared. She knows Trump is guilty. Rebecca Vaughn just ended Karoline's career on live TV. Karoline's jaw clenched. The hell she did. And then a new text appeared. Unknown number. Brief, blunt. "We need to talk. Call me." She stood there, looking at the message. No name, no background, but something in her stomach told her this wasn't just another news headline. This was something else, something larger. But something about it seemed significant. Karoline's instincts were screaming at her. This wasn't just another ranting troll, not a reporter looking for a follow-up quote. Whoever had sent that message, they wanted her attention. She paused for only a moment. Then she breathed and dialed. A rough male voice picked up on the second ring. "I watched the show." Karoline didn't answer immediately. "Who is this?" The man didn't answer her question. That recording they played. It's only part of the story. A shiver crept into her chest. Not fear, recognition. And you would know that how? Silence. Then, because I was in the room when it happened. Karoline's fingers tightened around her phone. Whoever this was, they weren't bluffing. But what they were going to tell her, it could change everything. She sat in her car, fingers hovering over the call button, her pulse steady, her mind racing. The man on the other side of the line had said he was in the room. The room. The one from the recording Rebecca Vaughn had just sprung on her live on TV. It might be a trap, a setup, some desperate move to lure her into saying something she shouldn't. But there was something in his voice, calm, certain, unshaken, told her otherwise. She pressed call. The phone rang twice before he answered. "I was thinking you'd call back." "No, hello. Who are you?" she asked, tone brusque, a pause. Then, somebody who's had enough of the lies. Karoline slowly exhaled. That's not an answer. I'm not going to give names on the phone, he said, but here's what I'll say. You're right. They cut the tape, twisted it around so it wasn't what it was. Karoline closed her eyes for a fleeting moment. She knew it. Tell me what they cut out. The man let out a sigh. Trump wasn't discussing covering up a crime. He was discussing closing down a phony investigation, one based on lies. Karoline straightened up. The role they didn't play, he said, make it disappear, get rid of the lies. Her heart beat faster. That totally altered the meaning, and Rebecca Vaughn knew it. Karoline gritted her teeth. This wasn't mere media spin, this was intentional. Rebecca had laid the trap, but she wasn't alone with cards to play. Why are you telling me this? A beat of silence. Then the man's voice, even and measured, because you're the only one willing to push back. Karoline's hold on the phone tightened. She wasn't naive. This wasn't about justice. This was about leverage. If this man had evidence, then somewhere, hidden beneath the din, the fury, the viral clips, lay a truth that could unravel everything. She thought of the millions who had already watched the clipped recording, the headlines, the smug pundits, ivory towers of arrogance tearing her to shreds. Facts didn't matter to people. They mattered to what they wished to believe, and that was the true game. This wasn't ever about truth. It had always been about control, control of perception, control of the narrative, control of public opinion. Rebecca Vaughn had gotten onto that stage and knew exactly what she was doing, and Karoline had played right into her hands. But it didn't mean she had lost. She breathed out slowly. If what you're telling me is true, I need evidence. A hesitation. Then the man's voice, flat, cautious. I can provide that. But once you do, you'd better be prepared for what happens after. Karoline's gaze went to the rearview mirror. Her own face looked back at her. Was she prepared? Yes, because this wasn't about Trump or Rebecca Vaughn, or even the panel show. This was about fighting back. She ground her jaw. Send me what you have. And just like that, the actual war ensued. If you think the truth counts, don't let the media spin for you. Pass this video. Make your voice heard. And if you prefer to remain a step ahead of the spin, be sure to subscribe. We're only just beginning.